Now, as I talked about in my pro-life video, I don't look at women who have had abortions as criminals. I don't think that they did something knowingly. I think that there was a narrative sold to them that they should be having an abortion, that they should be taking control of their own life. And people who get abortions often make that decision with a misunderstanding of that morality.
When I think of babies, happy gurgles and giggles don't come to my mind. I think more whiny, annoying, loud, stinky, smelly, waste of time, life ruiner. So yeah, if I ever got pregnant, I think I'd terminate the pregnancy to avoid all that.
This is what I was just saying about people actively thinking that having children is bad. They actively think that a child is literally stealing your freedom. So number one, I would say that a lot of people would not agree with that statement. They would not say that having a child literally steals their freedom. But if literally stealing your freedom is the baseline for murder, if you have a family member who gets injured, do you have the right to kill them because you have to take care of them? When is it not justified to murder someone who limits your freedom?
Well, Abby, the fact is, children are quite literally the thieves of our futures. Women who seek out an abortion but are denied and are then forced to carry a pregnancy to term are far more likely to experience economic hardship compared to women who were able to get an abortion.
So this kind of argument is made on the pro-choice side pretty frequently. The idea that a baby shouldn't be born into bad circumstances. We don't get to choose somebody's quality of life for them. We don't get to see someone else's suffering and decide that it's too much and that we should end their life.
Well, Abby, tell me if you're comfortable with this. Are you comfortable with forcing an 11-year-old victim to give birth? This is kind of why we need safe, legal abortions, and this is why women should keep their reproductive rights.
Of course, with a woman who does get raped and gets pregnant, this is a hard topic and a hard part of the debate, but I do want to address it. So, a couple of things. One, the percentage of women who get abortions because they were raped is 0.5%. It's 0.5%. So it does not make up anywhere near the majority of abortions that women get. That's number one. Number two is that if a woman does get raped, it's a horrible thing that happened. The man should get the worst possible punishment. And women who get raped it's a horrible thing that's happened to them. The fact is that it's not the baby's fault. And we cannot blame the child for how it was brought into this world.
Abortion in the year 2019. It's the debate we didn't want to have in 1919 or 1959, so we're still having it now. And look it up. All around the world, there are countries where abortion still remains in a legal gray area, where it's still an unresolved question. I was raised in Canada. I was taught again and again that somehow Canadians were morally superior to Americans because we'd legalized abortion, whereas Americans had not. And that is a lie. Canada, the United Kingdoms, many countries around the world, the debate rages on precisely because we never have done what the people of Ireland did. We never made the commitment to democratically deciding the issue through a referendum. And once you commit to deciding the issue through a referendum, by the same token, you're going to commit to, through public education, engaging with people, caring about their beliefs, their perceptions, their misconceptions, and trying to solve the problem at that level. Really reaching out to and engaging with the people who have the passionate conviction that abortion is morally equivalent to murder. People who really believe that mothers should go to prison as criminals if they decide to have an abortion. Now, I understand that perspective. I understand it because it's not entirely false. It's clinging to concepts that are true but misleading. And those are important misconceptions to try to counter in the public. And in this case, even though I feel the left wing basically has come to the correct conclusions, they've come to the correct conclusions through reasoning that is completely false, dishonest, and internally incoherent. Okay, so let's deal with that first. The argument I've heard just today from the Young Turks, left-wing news source, you will have heard this from left-wingers your whole lives probably. The argument I've heard from the left wing today is that abortion is simply a medical operation between a woman and her doctor, and that therefore the government should have no role in it whatsoever. This is laughably, outrageously, ridiculously wrong. And yet, of course, if you look at it as just a single stage of analysis, if you look at it as an isolated fact, there's a sense in which it's self-evidently true. Yes, abortion is a surgical procedure, but that's not what we were debating, was it? Okay? Yes, having your tonsils removed is a surgical procedure. Yes, having breast implants, breast augmentation is a surgical procedure. Does that mean that there's absolutely no role for government, law, legislation, or public policy on these things? Does that mean that if breast implants were illegal, that you would object on the same grounds that this is a violation of women's rights? Today, the Young Turks, they claim that this is morally the same as rape because it's interfering with what a woman wants to do with her body. They actually made that claim. So, the fact that some breast implants are legal and some are illegal, more famously that some forms of bum enlargement, this kind of surgery, are legal and others are illegal. That's in the news a lot because some people got those procedures and some people died. The fact that those decisions are made in the public interest for public welfare by the government, the fact that actually there are myriad laws even governing whether or not you can have your tonsils removed. This is already one thing that's incoherent and dishonest with the argument. Even if we were to accept the premise that there was no more ethical significance to an abortion than there is to having your tonsils removed, we would still have a question of responsible public education and public policy of trying to reduce the number of people having their tonsils removed surgically every year. We still have to say, well, look, what is it? Is it a strep throat epidemic? Is it lack of hygiene? Is it food standards? Why is it that so many people are going to hospitals having their tonsils removed? Is there a misconception that you'll be a better singer if you have your tonsils removed? You have to do public education and tell people stop getting this. What is it we have to do step by step? So we have a society where there are as few tonsils being removed as possible, where in fact the ideal number of tonsillectomies, of tonsil removing surgeries, the ideal number is actually 0. And we're never going to achieve that. But let's admit this is something that's bad and wrong and a problem, and that we're engaged in public policy trying to minimize. That is the position that is unthinkable to the left wing and the mainstream left, the mainstream center left, because they've been avoiding the real ethical, cultural, and even legal problems raised by abortion by trying to insist, one, that it's simply a type of surgery, and then two, any legislation interfering with it is violating a woman's right to just privately decide this with her doctor. And the shame of it is, as I say, the left wing has basically come to the right conclusion that, yeah, the simplest solution to this problem is to legalize abortion and try to have public education campaigns making birth control more available. Indeed, even making adoption more available, making alternatives more available to try to minimize the number of abortions in society. But on the other hand, the conservatives and the right wing are clinging to the simple notion that abortion is a form of infanticide. And that also, regarded in isolation, is indeed a fact. I think every society in the history of the world has had one form of socially sanctioned, legally acceptable infanticide or another. And in our society, here and now, when children are born with very serious mental and physical disabilities, I think we should have infanticide permitted for some number of months, within some limits, for some conditions, even after the birth of the child. It's a tremendously scary and saddening thing to take responsibility for. But again, you can confront people with this moral question. Well, if you really believe that this is murder, if you really believe that under any circumstances having an abortion, under any circumstances committing infanticide is murder, who is going to raise those children? Is it you? And if not you, then who? In the year 2019, the legality of abortion is a tremendously simple issue, made complex and convoluted by the dishonesty of people on both sides of the debate. The dishonesty, I feel, stems from a fundamental discomfort with democracy itself. Very few people on the left or right are really interested in democracy in the sense handed down to us from ancient Athens, democracy in the sense practiced by the people of Ireland when they had a vote on the issue, when they had a referendum, when they determined through direct democracy whether abortion should be legal or illegal. That is ultimately the decision that we all have to make, society by society, state by state, whatever the case may be. And if we make the decision democratically, then we all have to be tremendously concerned about public education, about the level of enlightenment and understanding that the general public has as is applied to this issue. Because if the public lacks a certain level of education or enlightenment on the issue, then it's going to have terrible consequences for us all. That's one of the fundamental virtues of democracy as opposed to an elitist despotism. If you live in an elitist despotism, you can just decide, well, this is the right answer. A small number of people in power make that decision, and then the rest of us live with the consequences. And it doesn't matter what percentage of the general public fail to understand it, have an ethical or other objection to the idea. And today in the United States of America, only 18% of people take the view that under absolutely no circumstances should abortion be legal, should abortion be permitted. Those people matter. Those people matter too. If you sincerely care about democracy, about the future of the democracy in your country, you should care about reaching out to and educating those people, engaging with them, and getting them to think beyond just a single stage of analysis. Now, the term I just used may seem unfamiliar, but it's really easy to understand. I'm vegan. We have similar and similarly flawed debates about veganism all the time. Matt Dillahunty recently said that he saw absolutely nothing wrong morally with drinking cow's milk. And he said this because drinking the milk itself doesn't kill a cow. All right, that may be true, but that's looking at only a single stage of the process. That's not doing a full life cycle analysis. It's not even doing a 10-year analysis. Okay, so if you have a society where 1 billion people drink 1 billion liters of milk every day, why don't we go through an analysis of what it takes to produce that milk, what it takes to have cows giving birth to and maintaining the necessary number of cattle, what those cows eat, and the sewage they're going to generate, and what happens to that sewage, because it doesn't go into the sewage system. It pollutes the rivers and lakes and oceans and so on and so forth. You look at a cycle of suffering that's being perpetuated by forcibly inseminating cattle, keeping them in confinement, etc., etc. Now, it's very obvious. It's very obvious. And yet, someone, a so-called philosopher, a leader of political opinion like Matt Dillahunty, he spent decades of his life believing in this simplified, single stage of analysis that in a sense is true. The problem isn't that it's false. The problem is it's true but misleading. All right? Now, I think the most sincere position adopted by the right-wing conservatives in this, which is, again, in isolation true, is that they will say abortion is an act of infanticide. And that is true, but that is only a single stage of analysis. I knew one young man who was what we'd call a crack baby. His mother used cocaine during the pregnancy. In fact, I met him in Canada. It was when I was living in Canada as a kid. His family ran away from the city they were living in, the United States. It was something like Chicago, I forget, to try to get away from the drug scene. They were trying to quit. When she found out she was pregnant, she was trying to quit, ran away to a new city, escaped the circle of friends and familiar dealers. You can imagine there's a psychological as well as practical element to that. And he had brain damage and physical damage from his mother's drug use. And he said, he was haunted by this idea that he was himself born to be a drug addict. To some extent that's scientific, and to some extent I think that's a bit of a folktale, so on and so forth. He's got to live with the consequence of that for the rest of his life. And today, these things are a lot easier to put together, partly just due to the technology of YouTube. You can put together case studies and testimonials and real examples, and you can share them with the public. You educate the public about the real consequence of these things. In the past, lawyers had to go around and find people who were willing to testify in front of Congress or in front of Parliament, depending on what country you're in, and then newspaper writers would report on that, and then people would just be looking at the dry text of this in a newspaper and not seeing the physical reality of what it is to raise a kid who's brain damaged or disabled due to the drug addiction of the mother. And with that guy I met, he was one of the lucky ones. I mean, he had use of all of his arms and legs and so on. He was an interesting guy. He was a nice guy. But you can imagine that was a chilling and very interesting influence for me in my life, meeting someone whose whole life was shaped by the drug addiction of his parents. That's not something that is maybe going to happen. That's something that is inevitably going to happen. The United States has an epidemic of drug addiction. At the moment, I think it's extraordinary the level of addiction to painkillers, to opiates. And there are women who are going to get pregnant and are going to continue using opiates, continue using cocaine, continue using heroin, continue drinking alcohol, and so on during the pregnancy. And a lot of those women currently have abortions. If you make abortion illegal because of this single stage of analysis, the isolated principle that abortion itself is an act of infanticide, let me ask you, do you want to raise those children? Do you want to take responsibility for raising the child of a drug addict? And let's say, again, not too hypothetically, the drug addict abandons that child to be a ward of the state, to be left in an orphanage. If not you, then who? I have a daughter. My daughter is 6 years old. We gave birth to my daughter in a hospital. And I've mentioned this before, the ward we were in basically was the healthy babies ward. But still, you're only there, if you really have no problems, you leave 5 minutes after you give birth. So a lot of people had some mild health problems. Because we were vegan, I had to go out and buy food for my wife and carry it in. And I would come up the stairs in the next ward, next section of the hospital. And those are the families dealing with really bad news. Those are the families who had babies where the heart was outside the body at the time of birth, born with a hole in their heart, hole in their spine, babies that were going through, surgery. And guess what? Some of those families, some of them knew the baby had a serious malformation before it was born. Some of them had the option to abort. And if you say, but abortion is infanticide, I would say back, that's true. But that's only a single stage of analysis. And in the whole history of the world, every society I know of, has had, formally or informally, some capacity for socially sanctioned, for acceptable, for legal infanticide, which could indeed include situations like a child being born with its heart outside of its chest, these kinds of very serious physical and mental deformities. Now, I would not merely vote to make abortion legal. So I do think abortion should be legal. That's what I would vote for. I would vote to make infanticide legal within certain clearly stated limits. I think people can give birth to a child and realize, wow, this child is so physically impaired or so mentally impaired that, and again, very often you're looking at complex surgeries the moment after the child is born to reconstruct its head, reconstruct its mouth, reconstruct its heart, and so on. And yes, I do think that responsible adults, parents, this is another question, who should make the decision and so on. This needs to be legislated carefully. Maybe for the first 6 months after a child is born, there should be the option to euthanize, to genuinely commit infanticide, to spare that child a life with those physical or mental deformities. It's a decision I take very seriously, but taking those decisions seriously is what democracy is all about. As tempting as it might be for me to just drop the mic there, I think I should say a little bit more about how morally incoherent the left wing's position on this is. What I hear from the left, just today I was hearing it from the Young Turks, Left of Center podcast and news show. What I hear from the left is the insistence that the surgical operation itself is no different from a woman having her tonsils removed. Single stage of analysis. And then they build on this premise the idea that any intervention by the state whatsoever, actually today, the Young Turks, they said that it was rape. They said it was morally tantamount to rape for the government to legislate anything that would constrain what a woman can or cannot do with her own body. Okay, sorry, there are laws that govern having your tonsils removed. Did you know that? I can't just go in and decide to have my tonsils removed because I think it would look cool or would make me sing better. There actually are laws on that. There are laws very specifically about what women can and can't do to their bodies. Some breast implants, breast augmentation, some breast implants are legal and some are illegal. In the United States, most of the surgeries to make your bum bigger, to make your bum, are illegal. And you may have heard about this. Some women fly to other countries where they don't have that legislation in place. So yes, there are always going to be laws governing what surgeries people can and can't have under what circumstances, even when the surgeries do not have any of these ethical, cultural, or religious questions attached to them. I don't know of any religions that attach a special significance to keeping your tonsils in your throat. I think it's an open question. The morality of breast augmentation is a topic for another video. But yeah, that debate isn't over. There are signs now that there are really serious health consequences, negative health consequences from breast augmentation, and probably that debate needs to be had again, probably needs to be voted on to what extent which surgeries are permissible and which are not. Here's the thing. What the left wing is refusing to do is acknowledge, even if we were just talking about removing your tonsils because of tonsillitis, it would still be a morally positive, virtuous, and pure position to say that you aspire to have a society in which the fewest people possible get their tonsils removed. To say, hey, you know what? This operation, it's bad. It's a bad thing. In a perfect world, nobody would have to have their tonsils removed. And we've got to look at all the policies and procedures we can put in place so that there are circumstances that avert this, where there are as few as possible, and so that there are alternatives. All right? That really is the morally responsible attitude to take towards abortion. And nobody can do it because nobody's willing to get past this single stage of admitting, yes, abortion is a form of infanticide. And therefore, there are all kinds of alternatives. There are alternatives that include the child being given up for adoption. There are alternatives that include making contraception as available as possible and the public being as well informed as possible, et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole series of policy choices you can make that are going to minimize the number of accidental and unwanted pregnancies. And yeah, some of them are coercive. Again, when you think about it, when you think about women who, may be legally insane, may be mentally impaired, may be drug addicts, may be a combination of all three. You can sometimes get, one woman like that who's repeatedly getting pregnant, repeatedly having abortions. There are tough decisions and legal questions. They say, okay, well, at what point do we start really legislating? People have to take responsibility for their own reproduction. And when they fail to, at what point do you say, look, we have to really incentivize people to take this responsibility and take it seriously, because we don't want to be a society with X billion abortions happening per year. We want to be a society that in a judicious way, through public policy, is minimizing the number of abortions. Okay? Now, one of the reasons why I'm so familiar with all this is that it's closely comparable to discourse we have within veganism. Okay? If you come to the conclusion that everyone should adopt a vegan diet, it's a good conclusion. But people come to that conclusion through incredibly flawed, circuitous, and wrong courses of reasoning. One of the most common, they say, oh, well, all life is sacred, therefore they're vegan. I don't believe that. I'm a nihilist. I don't think any life is sacred, human or animal. But I'm vegan because it's the right thing to do, because I'm interested in people taking responsibility for the consequences of their actions and making the world a better place. All right? Legalizing abortion, which countries like Canada have not yet done. Countries like the United Kingdom, England, have not yet done. Society is carrying on in a very hypocritical way. If you really believe in democracy, you should don't press for the status quo. Press for outright legalization. Right now in the United States of America, you should be pressing for a referendum on a constitutional amendment to legalize abortion. You should do it democratically. You don't want Supreme Court justices making the decision. Stop and think. Why do you call a judge in court, my lord? It's a court. Think about the meaning of the word court. This is a medieval, feudal aristocratic arrangement. This is not democracy. You don't want judges deciding this for you. You want to decide this democratically, and as soon as you commit to a democratic solution to this problem, then you're going to commit to public education, lobbying, involving people, even the backward people of Arkansas, the people who are most committed to making abortion illegal. You're going to involve them in this discourse to legalize abortion. You have to understand that the commitment to legalizing abortion is not going to be the end of the struggle. No more than the commitment to legalizing abortion would end adoption or would end drug addiction or would end the myriad other social problems of, indeed, rape, incest, that intersect with this issue. Okay, you're not going to solve all of them with one law, and you're not going to solve all of them with one stroke of the pen. And there's going to be an ongoing discourse about how we as a society can better educate and prepare people of both genders so that we have the fewest unwanted pregnancies possible, so that we have the fewest abortions possible.
I mean, really, people like to disrespect my crew, but the fact is that you know my name and I don't know you.